I'm Dr. Tim Ship, the superintendent of the school district. I'm in my 6th year as superintendent and my 11th year in the district. I've been a community member for going on 17 right now. I'm very, very excited and proud of the community and the students and all that we are doing, but equally as excited about the future, and that's why we're here. We're here to bring our community together to engage in the conversation about what education looks like in our schools and what our facilities look like to support that education in the short and long-term years ahead. And it comes at a perfect time. Almost 3 years ago, our Board of Education set us on a path, strategic plan. And here what you see on the screen are the 4 goal areas that the Board of Education established to guide the work of our staff as we educate the students in District 115. So you see the 4 goal areas. In addition to that, and in the top left, you see the portrait of a learner. And those portrait of a learner characteristics started out as students. But knowing as dialogue occurred, and through that conversation, we realized that it's not just about the kids. It's about our community, it's about our business leaders, it's about our staff. Those characteristics that you see on the screen really exemplify what we want all of our community members to exhibit and to acquire and to develop and foster in the work that we're doing in our schools. But as you also know, education is much different certainly than when I went to school, and maybe certainly is different than some of you went to school. The way in which kids engage with the content, the way in which our staff deliver the content, the way in which our kids interact with each other, the technology that's being utilized, the career and college pathways that kids are pursuing, all of that is changing. When you think about our kindergartners now and what the world's going to look like when they leave the walls of our high school and what's going to go by in a very short 12 years or so. So we have certainly an obligation in our district to make sure that we are providing every opportunity for our students when they leave our schools to pursue whatever avenue they have and to be a successful contributing member of our society. Also, in our community, as many of you know, we are continuously seeing more homes going in. Our enrollment in each of our schools is going up, some larger than others and quicker than others. And our facilities continue to have certain pressure points. The last couple of years, we've been able to navigate that, both because we've seen decreases in some schools, that's given us some relief, but we've also moved some programs across the district to, again, accommodate the increased enrollment in our schools. But knowing that the growth is going to continue to come, we've engaged on one end with a group of architects that are here tonight with us, the DLR group. We've also recently engaged in the beginning process with the demographer. That's going to start looking at our projections over the next, for the short and the long term. So through that work, along with the the re-upping of our strategic plan and redevelopment of what the next 3 to 5 years is going to look like, all of those efforts now are at the early stages and part of the community conversation that we're having tonight. So we're very excited you're here. This is just the beginning. We're going to have another meeting on February 12th, where we hope you come back, and we'll talk about that at the end to learn about kind of where we're at a month from now, what we've learned, and where we're headed after that. But this is an important conversation. We did a boundaries work about 2.5 years ago that we laid the foundation of some options that we could relieve some congestion. But this approach we're taking is a little bit different. We're taking it from the angle of what do we want teaching and learning to look like in our schools, and how do our facilities support that? And it doesn't necessarily mean we have to build new schools, or knock down schools, or remodel all the schools, or any of the schools. It's a conversation that we need to have about how do kids going to learn in the future, how do our facilities support that? And looking at that gap, and then what decisions do we want to make as a community to do that? Also down the road is we're going to be having a conversation with our community about, are we a one middle school community? Are we a one high school community? Our high schools get to the point where we're at 1860 and growing. Our middle school is pushing 1,000 kids. And as our schools get bigger, typically you see less opportunities for kids. So as a community, we need to also talk about looking at all of our facilities and the footprint that they provide. What does that mean for our schools in the future? And what does our community want?
What's an educational master facility plan? Well, a traditional facility plan really just dealt with the practicalities of the space, of the schools, right? It was, do I need to repair this? Do I need to replace this mechanical unit? What are the kinds of basic requirements of structure that need to be contemplated? When we infuse this educational component into the planning process, we get a much more robust and stakeholder-driven process, right? Quite simply, this is about work, right? It's not anyone else's master plan. We're not going to come in and supplant ideas from here or outside of here to here. We want to make sure that what comes out of this master plan is uniquely Yorkville. And so the goal is quite simply to align the form to the function. We want to know that teaching and learning, the vision for teaching and learning is supported in this district in addition to those practicalities, in addition to the growth as was mentioned. So we don't have any predetermined conclusions. We don't know what will happen. This process is about discovery. And so we intend to see what will happen over the next several months. So as was mentioned early on, this is the conclusion of phase one. This is our findings of phase one. So this is what we call deeper understanding. This is our opportunity to go into every one of your facilities, to be a student for the day, to sit and listen to teachers as they share their experiences, to do qualitative and quantitative measures of each one of the facilities, to look at enrollment patterns, to look at capacity and utilization, all of these things, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Looking forward into phase two and beyond, phase two is where it sort of gets exciting, if you will. This is where we get to do some discovery and exploration of how those strategic plan initiatives, portrait of learner, how that all goes in portrait of graduate, how that all comes together into what might happen. The phase three is called programming, okay? So this is when we take those big ideas and we turn them into space. Phase four is the conceptualization. So that means, what does it really mean? How does it impact each individual school? What are the potential changes to that school? When we get to the conceptualization, that's a really fun and exciting task, but that's probably the most work of what we're going to do in the entirety of the process. When we get to phase five, we're really talking about game plan. How are we going to enable these changes over a long period of time? Because none of us can snap our fingers and say, in a matter of months, we're going to be able to enable all of these things, right? There are lots of things that have to be planned for when we get to that part. So we have lots of stakeholders involved in this process. We have three groups listed on the slide: primary users in green, core team members in dark blue, and then the broader Yorkville 115 school community in the lighter blue. So our primary users are our students, our teachers, our building level administration, staff, those kinds of things. Our core team members are really charged with looking at the detail of all of the phases and starting to assemble it into actionable information or concepts along the way. So the core team members could include any one of those stakeholders listed. We're working right now with the district level administration to put that core team together. It's not yet assembled. And then, of course, you all, right? The school community, parents, students themselves, non-parents, business partners, industry partners, those kinds of things are all influential in determining the outcome of this master plan.
The next series of slides is some of the information and summary of what we've done in phase one. So as Jason indicated, phase one is deeper understanding. It's where we get to learn more about you as a district, your facilities, some key activities that we've completed, reviewing existing data that the district has provided to us, conducting listening tours, and a day in the life, the teacher activity logs, as well as physical traces, which Bonnie will touch on later in the presentation, and indoor environmental quality and related indoor air quality surveys that Shona will discuss later in the presentation. This is a snapshot. We visited all schools. We had 6 DLR group experts walking the facilities. We looked at everything from early childhood through the 12th grade. We shadowed 21 different students, and we got great participation across the district for the activity logging that we did. Where teachers participated in a week-long log of the activities and how they are using their classroom spaces so that we could analyze that as part of our study. We also did some AM and PM listening tours to garner some feedback from each of the building staff. So some facility context. So this is just an overview, kind of a plotted timeline, if you will, of the facilities. This gives you an idea of facilities that are less than 20 years old, the darker, kind of more bolder bubbles, if you will, and then the older than 50 years old. So predominantly the elementary schools are the older facilities as well as the academy. It's kind of how over time they schools were constructed and when they were constructed. This is a snapshot of the enrollment history for the district from 2010 up to this year. This gives you an idea of how enrollment has consistently grown throughout the last decade. So part of what we review as the deeper understanding phase is taking a look at each building and their respective site size. Some factors that influence site size, it can depend on the type of school, the number of students that are using or attending that school, any outdoor activities that might be held at that school, and the number of parking spaces needed, as well as how students are attending, whether they're being primarily dropped off, whether they're being bused in. Things such as stormwater management. So when buildings are constructed, you oftentimes have to offset the construction activity with either detention or rain gardens, or find a way to offset stormwater on site. Wetlands and floodplains are unique features of the site, availability of the land, whether it's urban or suburban or rural. So oftentimes some of our clients are more urban, and they you'll see in context that they have a lot smaller sites than guidelines recommended by the state. So this is a summary of the district taking a look at the site acreage information. The biggest takeaway is that being a more suburban school district and your availability of land, majority of your sites are well within what the Illinois State Board of Education guidelines are. 3 of the campuses are smaller than the guidelines, but not to a detriment, you would say, for activities. That includes Bristol Grade School, which is one of the older facilities, the Yorkville Grade School, and the combined site with the academy, and then the middle school. And so this is, you can see each of these respective schools' site analyses on the handouts that we provided on the back page, just to give you an idea of where they might fall differently compared to the guidelines. So how are these determined? So the Illinois State Board of Education, or ISB, has guidelines based on the number of students, so set number of acres for every 100 students, and it varies by whether or not it's an elementary, middle, or high school. You can see how those are tabulated in the bottom left. So the representation on the right shows the actual school site in the black outline, the dashed outline, and then the guideline size, what that might look like if you just offset. So some other factors we look at are factors that influence building size. This could be the type of school, number of students attending the school, the educational curriculum and how it's delivered, services, programs, and amenities such as sports, athletic, and performance. Climate also has an impact on it. Here in Illinois, obviously we enclose our corridors and hallways, so that becomes part of the building square footage and footprint, and is tabulated in the gross square footage of the building. Whereas in warmer climates, California and Arizona, much of that is outdoors, so they don't have to temper those areas, and those are not included in the building size. This is a glimpse over how the gross building size of schools have grown over time, showing all the way back to the 70s up until this is the snapshot from 2014. So it has steadily increased, and that is often attributed to type of programs and how facilities and classrooms and spaces are being used today, much differently than they were in 1970. We took a look at 3 different scenarios, if you will, so student A, B, and C. And this is currently 3 different pathways that 3 different students might take to get from one school, from kindergarten, pre-K, and all the way up to 12th grade. So student A is a representative example of those attending Circle Center or Yorkville Grade School, and they would then transition to Yorkville Intermediate, the middle school, the high school academy, and the high school. Similarly, student B, you can see their transition pattern as well as student C. And this is really to show you the number of transitions that a student goes through from their start all the way through the time they graduate. The thing that we recommend and the districts try to achieve is the least amount of transitions possible for students as they go throughout their educational experience. So Jason is going to talk about capacity and utilization.
Before I do that, I want to just touch on one more thing on this slide here. When you look at students and how they transition through Yorkville, you can see in parentheses below each one of the school names the square footage per student at a gross square footage level. So you can see how their experience might change or be different. Those amenities that Carrie had mentioned may be different depending upon the time period in which the building was built, the priorities, budgeting, those kinds of things. Just a qualifier for us as we consider options moving forward, whether or not it's a priority to address some of those things or whether or not they're fine the way that they are to meet the needs of your students today. So just another data point to consider as we go through the process. Capacity and utilization is something that is an important topic, particularly in districts as yours has grown over time and will likely continue to grow over time. I want to qualify first that the capacity of a building is fluid. We're going to talk about 3 different ways that we consider the number of people that could be in the building, actually 2 different ways that the number of people the building could hold, okay? There's some important caveats here, but the effective capacity is fluid, whereas building occupancy, we'll talk about that in a minute, is not, it's fixed. So why calculate the effective capacity? Well, as I mentioned earlier with the master planning process, when we start to look at the educational components, the academics, if you will, the effective capacity is related directly to the student experience and to the teaching experience, right? The ability of those learners to be in spaces that are adequately sized for their needs based on teaching and learning objectives. So I'm not going to go through all the detail of how it's calculated, but I do want to stress that the guidelines that have been created will be either confirmed or challenged throughout the process, right? Part of this deeper understanding is to qualify what exists today. Part of the rest of the process will be to qualify what's right for your district. So we're not saying that this is right or wrong. This data is just to have a starting point for our conversation. So these guidelines help us out in this regard for us to calculate the effective capacity based on how school is delivered on a general level in the state of Illinois. We'll get to the Yorkville specific metric as we get further through the process. So just as an example, again on your handouts in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a bar chart similar to this. You'll see 3 bars. You'll see the occupancy on top, the effective capacity in the middle, and the current enrollment on the bottom on the lower darker red bar. So let's talk about occupancy for a second. Occupancy is related to fire safety. That is the number of people that you can exit safely out of the building in any given period of time should an incident occur, like a fire. So that is always going to be greater than the number of people that you would effectively educate in a facility. Think about that for a second. We're here in this auditorium. It seats a couple hundred people. I don't know the exact number. 650. So the occupancy of a building says that this space is full at the same time the classrooms are full, at the same time the cafeteria is full, at the same time the gym is full. Okay? That's not how you would have school. The effective capacity takes into consideration some of those school-based factors, right? So utilization of the facility, how the spaces are currently utilized. I'll give you for instance. If you have a room called classroom, and it simply is a large rectangle that you know that students go into, well, utilization is directly impacted by the type of instruction that occurs in that space. If you have a general ed classroom, and the next year, because of a specific need, you need to convert that into a different use, all of a sudden the capacity now will change. That may be a limited capacity or something like a special program. It's going to have a lower number than a general ed classroom, or maybe even a higher number. So that's why that number is fluid, and we measure it differently. So you see the enrollment is roughly, in this case, in the sample, is roughly half of the occupancy of the building. So that means from a fire safety perspective, we're all good. From an effective capacity perspective, we want to continue to be sensitive to the conversation as we move forward. But again, it is a fluid thing, not necessarily a finite or fixed number. So here's a good example. So we have three graphics from left to right. You'll see the code occupancy of that same classroom box on the left. My laser works. At 44. So the code tells us we can have 44 students in a classroom. The actual number of students observed in this particular classroom was 27, and the effective capacity is 25. These two numbers are really close to one another. We know with furniture solutions and the right amenities in that space that this will work quite well. But I would challenge any of us to say that the educational adequacy of this space at 44 wouldn't be taxing to those students and teachers. So this is why we don't consider this number at face value. We look at this number in a different way. You'll also see on your infographics an area comparison sample. So getting back to, again, we want to understand the district at a larger perspective. You will see bars in the back. There's a bar chart in the back and a bar chart that's kind of overlaid in the front. The one in the back is the elementary average, in this case, in the sample. So let's say that the average elementary classroom in the district is 861 square feet. In this particular example, this was Bristol grade, was 844. So a little bit below the average classroom size in the district for elementary school. Likewise, you can see the kindergarten, early childhood, so on and so forth, how those bars compare with certain qualifications, of course, by asterisk, so you can see how we've done that. That also is contained on all of your infographics for each one of the schools. Accompanying that is a floor plan diagram that looks like this. So we have cataloged the utilization by color. So you can see the palette of colors and the correlating spaces. So a core classroom here in dark blue, 25. The number in red is that effective capacity number, not the occupancy number, the effective capacity number. And so we've codified that this is indeed a core classroom and it has an effective capacity of 25. What else are we looking for? We're looking for travel distance. The amount of time that it takes a person to walk from point A to point B, in this case downstairs, and to the next level, and what that transition time would look like. And we calculate that, you can see my laser, for a kindergartner and for a third grader. Little legs walk differently, right? So we want to make sure that there's a range of time to understand, again, how that transition affects the student experience, the teaching experience, the time on the task. So you'll see a myriad of those qualifications, but again, if any one of these were to change, the effective capacity would also change. You'll also see a couple of spaces that have red outlines around them with dashed lines. So we're indicating that there's an undersized classroom based on what the district has targeted for class sizes, and what we've observed as being in that space as an example. Or we may see a misalignment. In other words, maybe there's a core class happening in a science lab, and that may be due to a number of factors. That didn't happen here, but that's just an example. So again, look for this kind of information on your infographics. We're going to talk a little bit about physical condition. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, and coordinating with the district, and reviewing with them the district capital project plan, physical condition items. You'll see up here is a representation, and not prioritized in any means, of what a 5-year look ahead might look like for maintenance and projects in the district. So everything from masonry, tongue pointing, predominantly brick buildings. So over time, as part of the maintenance, you equate those to make sure that you get the longevity out of the buildings and you're not getting water infiltration into the buildings. Camera installations and as part of a ongoing project, some bleacher repairs at the high schools, roof replacements, some asphalt patching or replacement, maybe your parking lots, under pathways, and then some equipment replacement needs, as well as ongoing 10-year health by safety improvements. The ISB, Illinois State Board of Education, requires every 10 years that a survey be conducted at each of your facilities to notice, to pinpoint items that need to be updated or addressed to meet certain code requirements, as well as mechanical equipment replacement. So this is just a snapshot, by all means not the exhaustive list. For listening tours, we met, as I mentioned previously, in the morning and afternoon at each of the schools, and had an opportunity to speak with staff members. And the nice thing about these opportunities is it gave us insight to items or experiences that they might be having in their classrooms or different spaces throughout the building that we didn't readily see when we were observing. They, for lack of a better term, they're living in these facilities and they're spending most of their day in these facilities. So it's helpful to get this insight. So these are, you'll see a summary of the elementary school top 5s, and we'll have some for the middle school and high school as well. There's a desire, a common thread, to have more flexible and collaborative learning environments, more flexible furniture, pull-out spaces, small group gathering spaces. There were comments about really needing some technology infrastructure upgrades to be able to support the technology that's growing, the use of it throughout each of the classrooms in the district. Some qualitative statements about sound transfer, and you'll see later in the presentation some actually quantitative data and measurements to support some of the comments related to acoustical sound transfer between adjacent spaces from side to side, as well as those spaces that are stacked in two-story buildings. And what we find predominantly throughout a lot of the districts that we work with is that there's always a desire to have temperature, thermal control over their spaces, so that it leads to less inconsistencies throughout the day and they're more comfortable. One of the good things we found, so we didn't focus only on the negative. We tried to pull out some positives from them too, just to see if we could replicate things throughout their buildings that they really enjoy. But they really have and show a great care and pride in their decor, as well as creating an identity and sharing student work all over, which is great to walk into a building and see what's happening. Middle school top 5. The commons are well maintained and well used. I know that when I walked through there, it seemed to be the place that the students wanted to be. So that was great to see. Again, temperature, one of the points we often see in this, as well as storage and places to house items, as well as different equipment, materials. Vehicular traffic on site was a comment that we got from a number of the teachers here as well, whether it's it was back to that question, they maybe understood the traffic patterns, but not necessarily followed. So, and then acoustics as well was a comment that we received from staff members that they felt that in some of the spaces they're not quite adequate, and that the acoustical separation could be improved. Between the high schools, there's a disparity between the academy and the high school, as well as within the high school, between the types of features and finishes, as well as the types of flexible furnishings. So that was highlighted by staff members, as well as spaces for breakout and collaboration. Hallways tend to be pretty congested during passing periods at both campuses, and then a desire for field house and an auditorium on the main campus of the high school was expressed. One of the wonderful things we saw throughout the high school was pride in student creativity and talent with murals and artwork throughout. And then another tidbit was related to the need for quiet spaces. So not only large group or large activity spaces, but places where students can, have their own little nook for each to be able to participate in reading activities or focus more quietly on them. So to support that, our staff, the other group staff, our observations, in fact, show that walking through the building, the classroom, the furniture, and other features do support what comments we receive from the staff. In general, the buildings are in great shape. They're well maintained. We did note the sound transfer between walls and ceiling floor spaces and the need for storage. We did notice the need for access to infrastructure, for electrical outlets, and spaces for students making more creative projects. And then something that we've been seeing a lot lately is students not utilizing or even stopping at their lockers, mainly taking most of their materials with them. And with regard to furniture, just a desire to have more flexibility, less restricting furniture. And with that, I will pass it over to Bonnie, and she will talk more about the day in the life and teacher life.
So as you look around the auditorium, one of the things to think about is what it would be like if we asked you to get together in a group of 6 and have a discussion and work on a piece of paper collaboratively right now. The design of this room, and especially the fixed seating, is going to limit you, and that's kind of the image I'd like you to keep in your head while we go through this part of the presentation, because a lot of this is about the difference between the design of the space and how it's currently being used for teaching and learning. One of the activities that we do is Day in the Life, and that means that we live life for a day as a student. All 6 of us had opportunities to shadow several students at several different schools and spend the entire school day with one student. We got to know them pretty well and had a lot of fun. We got to go to all their classes. I even got to participate in learning some Disney songs, so it was really great. And we really get to feel what it's like to be them and sit at their desks. This is a lot of words that you can certainly read in the downloaded version. I'll break it down really quickly for you. What we're trying to do right now is just get a snapshot of the current practices. How does teaching and learning currently happen in the buildings, and what do we currently see that's limiting what people want to do? As we get into phase 2, this is a springboard to talk about how it might happen in the future. So as we also look at the limitations now, we want to understand what might be a limitation down the road. We shadow students and visit their classrooms. We also get to talk to their teachers. We ask that teacher volunteers fill out activity logs for the week, so we're getting not just our observations, but an unprecedented 62 teacher activity logs from across the district are also factored into the Day in the Life. We code the activities into categories, and I'll explain a little bit about those categories. And then we look to see what patterns are emerging. These are different in every district, and there's some really unique patterns at Yorkville that are just part of the preliminary findings. So before I go on, we have researchers like me on the team. We also have educational experts and former superintendent. We break these categories down the way we do for 2 reasons. One One is physical. They have some sort of physical need like a table or a movable chair or a whiteboard that's going to change the design of the space and the way people move around it. The second is cognitive. If it's in a category separately, it means maybe there's something different going on in our brains. We're trying to focus versus we're trying to brainstorm. We want to make sure that's supported through the space as well. So we got to shadow at every school, 21 students. And this is just a sample. There are breakdowns like this on the handout for each school. It's the big colored bar in the upper right-hand corner. But this is just 2 different days in the life of a 3rd grader. I got to shadow 2 different 3rd graders. There were some really interesting differences between the 2 and the activities that they participate in, this reddish set of bars up at the top, the different group sizes they got into, and the different spaces that they used. If you see bars stacked over each other in the red section, that means activities were happening at the same time. If you see these orange dots down here, it means we moved from one space to another. So we try to be really systematic about this and compare as best we can apples to apples across the district. One of the main differences that we noticed is different classrooms are leveraging technology in different ways. Some of them have gone entirely one-to-one, some of them are not there yet, and really interesting patterns are emerging around this. In the 3rd grade classroom that had a lot of technology and was leveraging it to change the way teaching and learning was delivered, there were a lot more concurrent activities, a lot more things happening at the same time. The class that had fewer one-to-one devices, the kids did more things as a group. Neither one of these is a better way to teach. All of the teachers are fantastic, and that is the most important thing in teaching and learning. What's important is that the room doesn't restrict either one of these teachers. So as we move forward through the process, if this technology infusion represents where Yorkville is heading, we want to look sure and make sure that those activities are not limited. Like I said, we get really systematic about this. The inner ring is group sizes. The outer ring is different activities we observe those groups engaging in. And this is a nice squint chart. You're not meant to be able to read it really closely. You just want to look at the difference between those groups. On the right-hand side, classroom B, this is not one-to-one, but groups are really evenly distributed. They get into a lot of different group sizes throughout the day, and there's no one that kind of outshines the other. But boy, do they spend a lot of time in small groups in that technology-infused classroom. And if that space isn't flexible to the needs of those small groups, it's going to restrict the teaching and learning. This is the question that we're going to answer over the next phases together. If this technology does represent where Yorkville wants to go with teaching and learning, how do we need to design spaces differently? What different furniture do we need in there? As I said, we had a lot of teacher activity logs, so we're looking at this to see how the teachers are trying to teach in their own words and expressing the types of lessons and the goals that they have in those same categories. The teacher activity logs look like this, and as I said, we've really been pleased. I've never had so many teacher activity logs to process, and people were really detailed. We really appreciate all of the information that we got. 4 grades K through 6, the average day in the life looks like this. This will be downloadable, so you can scrutinize the pie chart to your heart's content. But as you can see on the right, this long blue bar, 78%, that says a lot of time is being spent in classrooms. And we see this a lot in elementary schools. That room serves as a home base for students, and they rotate through different activities within it. So there's a lot of demand placed on one room to be a lot of things. At grades 7 through 8, the kids start moving throughout the building a lot more. Not surprisingly, the gym is utilized a lot. So is the classroom, so is the computer lab. And they're engaging in a lot more hands-on learning, but also a lot more focused work. So learning math, memorizing things where they need to avoid distraction. And then in grades 9 through 12, again, kids are moving through the school a lot more. Lots more hands-on learning, lots more physical activities with equipment. This isn't just PE, this might be music, this might be drama or dance, but things where they need the space to move around and have some equipment that they bring with them. As we go into phase 2, we're actually going to have curriculum and instruction workshops where we ask teachers to redo this pie chart in the future. And I'm really curious to see where we go with Another technique that we use is called physical traces. You can basically think of this like archaeology for buildings. A physical trace is a piece of evidence left behind by a person. So we observe behaviors and we ask questions, but we also look to see what people have done to the building and left behind that represents some way that they may be trying to change it to work better for them. If you think of a lot of elementary school classrooms that hang fabric over bookcases to reduce distractions so kids can't see what's on those shelves, that's an example of a physical trace that we would say, hey, they're trying to separate this off for some reason. Can we help them do this better through design? We also use this as corroborating or sometimes contrary evidence to what we hear in the listening tours. So we may see a heater on and a window open at the same time. This tells us something about thermal control. The user of that room may or may not have expressed it the same way in the listening tour. It's basically archaeology for buildings. We go through, we look at physical evidence, and we try to understand how it got there and have conversations about it so that we're not necessarily making assumptions. Some of the physical traces that we saw throughout Yorkville schools are physical traces that I have seen at every school I have visited. Missing storage for student stuff in classrooms. As Carrie said, students don't stop at their lockers as much, if at all, anymore in a lot of the schools that we visit. That means they're bringing a lot more stuff into the classroom. Overlapping or obstruction, especially in older buildings, we often see tables put in front of doors representing this door doesn't get used a lot. Maybe it used to connect to classrooms and now they don't need to anymore. Missing class space. Sometimes we see classroom activities happening out in hall. This means perhaps there's another room that they could go into if it were designed into the building. My favorite, informal signage, signs taped to things. Basically labeling it saying, please help me make this work better. So this is in an art room, saying that the overhead electrical outlets for art equipment, those are not for charging your phone, which is very tempting. As Carrie said, one of the great physical traces that we saw, we always look for displays of student identity, is these amazing murals at the high school that are professionally RFP'd from students and well-maintained over the years. It's really amazing. So we want to make sure we honor those things and protect them. Overloaded storage spaces is very common, as is missing work surfaces, especially for one-to-one technology. And then classroom zones and dividers, bookcases that act as walls, things like that. We want to look and see, again, is there maybe a different furniture solution that we could offer that would be a little more flexible for that teacher. And with that, if nobody needs a second stretch break, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Connie. Anybody want to stretch? All good? Okay, so moving on to indoor environmental quality. This is a very unique part of the DLR group master planning process. And it aims to quantify a lot of the things that we cannot see, but that dramatically impact students' ability to learn. We break indoor environmental quality into these 4 different buckets here. So there's thermal comfort, and that has to do with our degree of satisfaction with the thermal environment. There's also air satisfaction, acoustical satisfaction, and visual comfort. Interestingly enough, out of these 4 buckets, most of the time people don't complain about the air that you breathe, but it's the thing that impacts our brain the most out of these 4 aspects. So Harvard School of Public Health recently released a study showing that the quality of the air we breathe can actually impact cognitive function by up to 300%. So we want to make sure that the air that students are breathing is in fact the type of air you want people to breathe for learning. Just to compare that to thermal comfort, for every 1 or 2 degrees different temperature away from your desired temperature, there's only about a percentage difference in your cognitive function. So we really aim to focus on air quality. So we take a 2-pronged approach to quantifying each one of these metrics. The first part is we issue an indoor environmental quality satisfaction survey to all adults in the building. So it's about a 5-minute survey to understand if people are in fact happy with their environment. But then we also walk through the buildings and install sensors to verify or validate the things that the occupants are sensing in the building. So first of all, on the Indoor Environmental Quality Satisfaction Survey, we had different rates of responses in each building. We aim for at least 25% of all occupants to respond per building. So there's just a bar chart here on each building, and nearly all of the buildings reach that 25% response rate. Then just some high-level review comments on what people said about the buildings. Overall, people were complaining about acoustics the most. Typically, studies show that if acoustics is the problem, they talk loud and clear about that, and it's not something that they can ignore. So people did talk a lot about acoustics, and the main problem being that you can hear different distracting noises from adjacent spaces. People also complained about overlit classrooms. And then we did notice that most people do have access to natural daylight. This is awesome because it does impact your cognitive function and circadian rhythm of occupants. We see a lot of school districts that have storage closets that are converted into offices and things like that. The percentage of occupants that do have access to daylight was higher than normal. And then most of the thermal complaints have to do with controllability, which is pretty typical. Autumn Creek had the most satisfied occupants with air quality, and then there's some other statistics there on visual conditions and acoustical conditions. So Circle Center was the happiest with acoustical conditions. So on the back of all your handouts there, you'll see a lot of the results for indoor environmental quality sensor results. You're going to see some variables that you're familiar with, so like air temperature, relative humidity. These are terms you'll have heard before. There's also graphs there for terms that you may not have heard before, so I just want to go through a few of those here. The first one is volatile organic compounds. This is something in the air you breathe, and it's a carcinogen, so we do not want it in our buildings. But it's in all of the materials we put into our buildings. So paint has VOCs in it, carpet has VOCs in it, even your purses you bring into your space, all of this can have VOCs. We want to make sure that this is at negligible levels. Then particulate matter. Different sizes of particulate matter will impact people in different ways. We look for PM 2.5. This is very small particulate matter that if it gets into your lungs, it's small enough you can't cough it out. Again, this can be a carcinogen. Carbon dioxide is the last proxy for air quality that we use. The reason that we focus on this is because this is what Harvard School of Public Health is focusing on for cognitive function. We have a rubric to grade each one of the aspects of indoor environmental quality in addition to energy. It combines the satisfaction survey results with the measured data. So here's just some high-level rankings for each of the categories. So Yorkville Grade School performs the best from an energy standpoint. For air quality, Autumn Creek performs best. For thermal comfort, Circle Center. For acoustical satisfaction, Bristol Bay. And for visual comfort, Yorkville is Media. There's also low performers. I will say that overall, this district performs very high. When we look at the sensor results, there's the results showing that the buildings are safe, optimized, and then beyond optimization. All the buildings are safe. So I just want to get that out of the way before we share any results. They're safe, they're healthy, there's some aspects that we can begin to optimize, and that's what's on the back of your handouts that you can look through. So I'll just share a few of the results on the next few slides. So looking at carbon dioxide data, so ASHRAE, who are the governing body for HVAC engineers, they tell us how much air we need to bring into the building to ventilate them, so to keep the air fresh. The way that they test for adequate ventilation inside the rooms is the amount of carbon dioxide in the space. So just to add some context here, outside there's about 400 parts per million of CO2 outside. Inside, the threshold for ASHRAE is around 1,200 parts per million. So that's the maximum that ASHRAE require. I see buildings a lot of the time having 3,000 parts per million in classrooms, and that is going to impact cognitive function. Overall, this district is around the 400 to 800 parts per million range. There are some peaks in some buildings, so you can see on the back of the handed per building, you can see sometimes it does peak over the 1,200 parts per million range. And that's really to do with just, we need to just bring in some more outdoor air into some of the spaces. It's not a cause for concern. And the way that we look at that is the percentage of occupied hours over an adequate range, and there's not really that much of a cause for concern there. Then with VOCs, again, most spaces are within the required range for VOCs. We did see some classrooms that had higher levels of VOCs in it. We would say that it's a process-related issue. So if the VOCs are high and they remain high throughout the day, that would mean that there's a problem with the classroom. But say if it peaks after lunchtime, it may have something to do with something a student has brought in, or maybe they're using art material, something like that. So we'll continue to troubleshoot that to figure out where the VOCs are coming from. And then lastly, particulate matter. That was all in range. Again, there's some peaks. The particulate matter can peak because of things like sweeping, or just bringing particulates in from outside. So we'll continue to look through the data and figure out when these peaks occur. So you can see here, in this instance, at 9 a.m., there's a peak in particulate matter just for a second. This isn't a cause for concern again. So overall, the air quality is good. There's just some opportunities for improvement. So on to acoustics. The way we measure acoustics is in decibels. And we like to take a recording so that it's not just a point-in-time measurement. We take recordings of different classrooms throughout the building when they're not occupied in order to evaluate the background noise of those classrooms. So we want the noise criteria of a classroom to be around 35. And then the noise that is incorporating is things like noise from outside, noise from adjacent classrooms, and also noise from mechanical systems. So as Carrie mentioned, in this district, noise is an issue, and it has to do with acoustical separation from inside to outside, and then inside to an adjacent space. So there is some opportunities for improvement there. So the noise criteria goal is 35, as I mentioned, but it's actually at around 45 for most classrooms. So looking at thermal comfort, honestly, going through the thermal comfort results for this district, people were pretty happy with their environments. There's a low thermal performance on some of the buildings. It just needs more insulation if they're old. But looking at the response of occupants, people are fairly happy. They do want more control over the thermal environment. We did notice that humidity goes up pretty high, which is typical if you don't have humidity control in classrooms. But I did note that I would say that's why some occupants are complaining of stuffiness. I don't think it's to do with the ventilation. I think it's just to do with the humidity rising sometimes. And then for visual comfort. So a common problem in school districts is if you go into classrooms and then you replace the normal fluorescent lights with a like-for-like LED light bulb. So you're putting in a similar light bulb that puts out much more light, and as a result they become overlit. So this is what's happening here. The buildings are overlit. This is an awesome opportunity for energy savings. We would recommend delamping a lot of the fixtures, so that would be taking out some of the lamps in the fixtures. You would save energy and then dial the classrooms into the desired light levels. Just to add some kind of context there, we would hope for around 25-foot candles for classrooms. Some of the classrooms were at 80-foot candles, so we can just take out 2 of the light bulbs and save energy and reduce the foot candles in space. So here's just an example of some of our readings. So this was a number of different classrooms and the foot candle range measured. So in classroom A here, the foot candles range from 60 or 40 to 60, so we can dial that right down to the 20 mark. So that's it for indoor environmental quality. I just have one more slide on energy usage, and then I'll be handing it back to the team. When it comes to energy usage, we all have an electricity bill and a gas bill. And the way that we tend to benchmark the building performance of large districts is to calculate the energy use intensity. So you take your electricity bill and your gas bill, you convert it into the same units, so kBTU, and then you just divide it by the area. That way we can compare every building in the district to each other, but you can also compare it to your peers and other buildings of similar climate zone and space type. In Illinois, the typical energy use intensity, so your energy per square foot, is 53. So your average EUI is 62. That's higher than the average, which means that you're spending more money on energy, so there's an opportunity for savings. This is just on the left here a snapshot of all the buildings, how they compare to each other, and then how they compare to your peers. So if you look on the list here, Yorkville Academy, the EUI is 86. So that's the worst in the district, and then the best in the district is Yorkville Grade at an EUI of 32. Delamping and other operational energy savings is going to reduce all of these, which will help you save.
All right, so when we get all of this information together, the one thing that we want to do is kind of develop a holistic look at buildings. So we do give them grades. We have a scale of 1 to 6. A grade of 1 indicates that the facility meets the minimum requirement for that category or measures the lowest possible performance in that category. A grade of 3 is extremely average for a building of that age. And a grade of 6 is really exceeding expectations for a building of that age and type. Factors such as age, the size of the building, the number of additions that it's had over the years, the size of classrooms, performance of systems, these are all part of how we determine the grade of the building. The context is very important. These do not compare the district's existing facilities to brand new buildings. They are comparing them to buildings of like, to their relative closest peers in the district or cited reference standards. We break it down into 3 buckets. Each bucket is graded by the members of the team who have expertise in that area. We grade independently of each other and then discuss if there are major discrepancies to arrive at a final grade. So for indoor environmental quality, this gray bar across the top, most of the buildings are scoring noticeably above average, with the exception of the high school academy, and Grand Reserve is sitting right at about average. For educational adequacy, so the fit of the space types and the furniture to how the spaces are being used, to the technology infrastructure and all that information that comes from day in the life and the observations, the schools are sitting at right about average. So they're a little below to right at, and this usually represents kind of a misalignment between the furniture and the room, or the number of people in the room and the activity that they're trying to do. For the facility factors, we're looking at facility condition and how the building is performing. Buildings are scoring at or above average here as well. And the overall average grade across the bottom, bright and shiny red, again, this is at average or above. So for this aligns really well with what we saw. The buildings seem to be very well maintained for their age, and they're scoring a little above average for buildings of their age as well. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is where the low scores are. As Shona said, when it comes to indoor environmental quality, there are some really easy wins here. Delamping, ventilation, all of that is going to raise these scores with minimal effort. For educational adequacy, again, there are some easy wins here. They may have to do with furniture. They may be bigger things like changing electrical wiring or moving walls, but furniture is always a great place to start that can again raise these scores noticeably quickly. Give it over to Jason.
So where do we go from here?
I want to just highlight a few things. In fact, one key thing moving forward into phase 2, and that's something we call global perspectives. So as we have quantified and qualified your facilities up until this point, if you see quite a detailed perspective on each one of the facilities in a number of different manners, we're going to leverage that information as we move forward. So as we look at global perspectives coming up on February 12th, this is something we want you to tell your friends, neighbors, and family members around the community to come and talk about the future with us. This is an opportunity for you to give insight directly into how you want to shape your school moving forward. What does it really mean in the greater context of the things that were discussed at the beginning of the presentation tonight with the strategic plan and the goals of the district, coupled with the challenges and opportunities your students will see as they leave this district and either go on to careers or to college. So this is an important event. It's kind of a milestone in phase 2. I hope that you all are able to attend. Mark your calendars.
How will people who are not present tonight, others in the district, provide input similar to the polling that took place tonight? This will not be the only opportunity for people to answer those questions or questions like that. There will be other meetings for people to come to live and or email surveys that are sent out to get that input from people, including people here tonight where the app didn't work for you. So there will be further surveys. Thank you for asking.
Okay, so we have one question on what time of year the survey was taken. So we did issue the survey in winter time. I know there was some comments on the survey that it was uncharacteristically mild when the survey was issued, but that was just the weather that was outside at the time. I think people did comment about it being cold. That was the only complaint. So they did kind of put their head in the winter time when they were answering the survey, but it was in winter time. Typically, we will issue it in summer and winter and see the difference. But there's lots of comment sections throughout the survey so that people can add in different contexts throughout. I hope that answers your question. And then the other 3 questions are really focusing on how we pick the classrooms to do the sampling. And we actually pick it based on HVAC thermal zone. So we'll look at the entire floor plan and we'll pick a classroom based on orientation and then based on how the mechanical system is zoned. So it's not really based on, so the question here is, was it random sampling or was it representative of grade levels? And really it has to do more with the HVAC zoning and then the orientation of the building.
I have an easy question. How do we find out about information about internships? Our internships currently exist at the high school for our junior and senior students. So if you have a student that is interested, please make sure you seek out the high school administration and or the guidance counselor of your students. Certainly it's a program called Field Experience where we continue to expand. We're well over 100 students who are participating with a number of our local community leaders and business leaders. So very excited about the future of that program.
I'll take one, and I have a question for the person who wrote the question. Hopefully we can gain a little clarity. So it says, do you take into consideration which areas the students actually have to travel between classes? Yeah, and so I'll paraphrase if I can. So you have a student at the middle school, and transition time between classes can be quite a bit, depending upon where they're coming from or going to. You don't have time necessarily to visit their locker. You don't have time necessarily to visit the restrooms, those sorts of things. And we bring up the point about that being addressed through the process. And the question really then was that considered? And the excellent answer to that is yes. That's why we log that data. That's why we measure those distances. We want to create a baseline for a conversation to say, what are either the administrative variables that can help correct that, and just throwing that idea out there, maybe longer transition times or special circumstances related to transition times when those types of things have to occur, or is there a building-related solution that might help alleviate some of those things? When we get into phase 3 and we start looking at programming the facilities, we can also look at adjacencies of spaces. Since we have a wealth of data talking about how students utilize space and where they go throughout their day, we can start to look at those patterns and see if there's a better alignment of utilization in space to how students are using the facility. So let me see if I can paraphrase that conversation. I'm a middle schooler too, and I definitely empathize with that. So conversation about backpacks, maybe the locker position in relationship to the team, the amount of materials that students are bringing to campus, maybe because of some extracurricular activities or some other things. They may have to carry multiple backpacks or other bags along the day, and there's some stress in the classrooms. We definitely saw that in our physical traces, if you remember from that photograph, and student storage and things like that. Definitely in the conversation moving forward. Thank you for your comments. Other questions?
I sense a fellow statistics fan in the audience. So the question is, for the rating scale of 1 through 6 for aggregate grade, is the median 3.5? The arithmetical median, or the average, is 3.5. If you were to take the average of those numbers, it would mathematically be 3.5, yes. So that would be the statistical average. The average grade, meaning on average with a facility of its kind, was represented as a 3. So we're using the word average twice, and I'm sorry if that confused you. Did that answer the question for who that was?
Yes.
The next question I had is, were special education or early childhood classes studied? And the answer is a resounding yes. We both shadowed in self-contained classrooms to observe all students in those classrooms, and shadowed a student with an IEP throughout the day at the higher grade levels. And we also were in early childhood classrooms. Those are my favorites to shadow. They're very a break from my adult life. And the last one I have is, what is the most common request from teachers? And it is, at Yorkville and in other schools as well, storage, breakout spaces, and less acoustic distraction in the classroom.
Now, teachers would love to have the dial to turn the air up and down. They would love it, just like my kids at home.
The last question we have on yellow cards tonight is pertaining to that community engagement session I spoke about on the 12th, that global perspective. And there's a question about, will community members be allowed to speak at the G12 meeting, February 12th, I should say. And I don't know yet what the format of that meeting will be, whether or not there'd be literally an open mic and allow that conversation to occur, comment like it would be perhaps at a public comment session at the board meeting. However, there will be opportunities to work in small groups and partner with other community members on conversations to provide input on forums. We'll do some headline activities and some future-based activities to guide the conversation that evening. So I encourage you to come and provide input. This is a community-based, stakeholder-driven process, so we're not trying to exclude comments, but we also want to be sensitive to everyone's time. And so there will likely be an open format like this to answer any specific questions or comments, and then we can certainly follow up if there's not time that evening, either the district or our team follow up with that individual directly, if necessary. So again, this is an important conversation for the community. I encourage you to tell your friends and family to come and join us that night as we look forward with the data we have in hand as foundational information moving forward into the future for this district. Another question, hello. Okay. It seems that the majority of the buildings are smaller than the guideline. Did the required state parameter change with the new approach to teaching learning? This is a wonderful question. So, okay, so let's address a few things. So, it appears that the majority of buildings are smaller than guidelines. Okay, so let's take that one first. There are a number of reasons why any community would choose to build a larger or smaller facility than a guideline. A guideline is not a requirement or a mandate from the state of Illinois to say it must be this big or this small, as the case may be. But communities may prioritize facilities that support a particular program need, be it as a part of the student day or as a part of the extracurriculars that might occur. And so we see a wide variety of spaces in relationship to the guideline. Why do we share the guideline? Well, simply, it's an established guideline. It's one that exists to allow us, again, to facilitate the conversation, to talk about what may be right for your community. So I would not say that it is in any way a negative to have a smaller than guideline facility, or it may afford us to have a deeper conversation about a particular facility and its ability to support instruction, okay? So we're going to consider that in the future as we move forward. And then the second question, again, was to talking about the size parameter, and will it change or did it change with the new approach to teaching and learning? So the reason that we have phase 3 for programming is to right-size those things specific to Yorkville. So to go beyond those guidelines and talk about what's possible, because I can tell you that there are creative solutions that are more innovative from a facility perspective when it pertains to teaching and learning that are smaller facilities than some of the larger ones that may exist around this region or even the state of Illinois. So again, I wouldn't qualify small as inadequate. I would qualify small as an opportunity to have a deeper conversation and maybe look for a more creative solution to that one facility.
And then when you think about some of our most recent elementary schools that have been built, I give credit to our board currently years ago, as well as past administration, for one, working with our developers and acquiring those sites when we have a lot of neighborhood schools. We're working with our developers, so fiscally responsible to acquire those sites. But two, if you look at our new schools, when you look at Brooklyn Bay and on Street, and Farron's River YS, and the footprint of those buildings, they're very similar, obviously. The makeup of them and the design of them, and from the fiscal responsibility and the architectural drawings and the build out, our board did a great job of making sure that we were extending our dollars the best that we could at the time when the schools were built.
And again, so I'll paraphrase first in case you weren't able to hear. So the question talking about how student storage and the ability to access materials and transitions and how that all kind of plays into the classroom, and maybe over generalizing your statement, so I apologize if I am. But to answer that question, yes, of course. Industry partners, furniture manufacturers have recognized this as a need, right? So the chair itself is doing more duty than it used to. It's not just a place to sit anymore. It's a place to sit flexibly and store your materials underneath your seat and still have the ability to move that seat around in the space. And so that's just one example. Mobile storage that also doubles as that temporary partition for privacy on demand inside of the classroom is an important one that can also function as a small group space with a marker board on the back. We're going to look at the flexible utilization of space, both inside the space and outside of the space as a part of our coming phases. I will tell you that another component, we talked a lot about utilization of space and its effect on the capacity of a facility. We didn't talk about time. We did through a day in the life, but we didn't talk about it as a time factor. When we consider time, how a building is administrated from a time perspective, the day in the life activities and otherwise, that is the single largest factor of the building size. How often you're there, how often you use it, and what is the accessibility and adjacency of those spaces through time is a huge component. We'll talk more about that in programming, okay? So look forward to that conversation as well. But your point is very well taken, and those storage concerns, in particular, are ones that we're going to continue with. Flexible furniture, I will say just one more thing about flexible furniture. When we consider on an order of magnitude the capital plan or educational master facility plan regardless, we want to make sure that the investment is targeted and budget friendly. And so furniture is the sort of the first step in making these flexible classrooms really work for the kinds of instruction that we're seeing today, not only today, but what might happen in the future, at an investment that doesn't require moving walls. Right? And so we want to look at those kinds of things and leverage those opportunities as the process moves forward.
And I think some of that phase 2, when we start visiting and we look at some of our priorities, are going to be looking at how other facilities that are instructionally doing things maybe a little bit different than we are at times. How are they utilizing their time and their belt schedules, their travel times, and the instructional practice within, what furniture they're using, how are they monitoring the supplies of kids and the backpacks, and as they start moving away from storage units that are typical than some of our schools that we're available with some of our schools.
So we just have a few minutes left before your evening ends with us. Again, thank you for your time and attention. You've been wonderful considering the amount of information we've tried to share with you this evening. A few of the bold ideas, if I may. On the furniture, right on point, no desks in the rooms. Okay, so that was one of the bold ideas shared. Another one was pertaining to the classrooms themselves, so a large enough classroom for more students at different levels, learning with multiple teachers. So we are seeing that happening in practice today. We're seeing students be more fluid in their needs, personalizing learning as students have particular needs, shifting from space to space where a teacher might be able to help them or facilitate their learning in a different way. This one pertains to kind of smart buildings, if you will, installing a quote-unquote nest to learn student activities and occupancy, to know about lighting and environmental needs. This under the broad umbrella of what's called building automation systems. So these things do exist in your facilities today. We do have the ability through data points to increase the awareness of the systems and the activities inside of the spaces. And so this is also a wonderful opportunity. We also do something with real-time sensors. So the things that we went around and logged with as a part of our phase 1 study can be installed in spaces. They can just exist and live, and that data can be logged and trended over time to understand what those process-based anomalies might be, where you saw a couple of the spikes in some of our readings. So that would be beneficial in the ongoing understanding of your facilities as they evolve over time. And the last one pertains to cross-grade activities, so the opportunity again to integrate instruction amongst multi-age groups and learning through projects and technology. So some great ideas. Tim, do you want to share anything else before we?
No, I just want to again thank all of you for coming. I hope on the 12th we can fill the auditorium. Ideally, it is our community. And the fact that you're here, the fact that we have people viewing it online is very powerful and significant, but it's not enough. We need the voice of our community to say, this is what we want for our schools, this is what we want for our kids, now and those that are going to come long after our kids are all through. If there are any members of this audience or people that are watching that have an interest, we saw that slide about the 14 that we haven't yet finalized, or an ad hoc where you feel you might have, maybe don't have all the time to give, this is volunteer time, but you have some insights that we could capture during that time when the ad hoc committee is brought in. I would ask that you reach out to me and shoot me an email. Find me on the district website, my email, or stop by afterwards. So a great pride in our music department, as everyone in this room knows. Certainly very, very, very proud of what we've done musically for our community, for our kids, and for our schools. But certainly from a storage aspect, from the music department, from our practice facilities, primarily, especially at the elementary level, but probably could be argued all across the district. And then third is a comprehensive auditorium. So that's acoustically sound and certainly state-of-the-art for.
Yeah. 3 other dance studios I take out, they rent out other studios.
Yes.
Our daughters go to YCAC project, they go from the field, you build something, then.
Absolutely. And I think if there was probably a couple other people in the audience from we'd say the same thing about athletic standpoint, that we're missing a comprehensive field house. That we could again share with our community and get more younger students involved in programs and activities beyond school day, to bring our senior citizens to our community, to do a walking track, and to again with activities. So, agreed.
It was just handed a bold idea that reflected exactly that. It says, phenomenal auditorium for our great music, storage and practice. So again, it's been heard tonight. I really appreciate your input, your insight, your questions, your time and attention tonight. We look forward to engaging you further in the process. We're going to stay after, at least I'll have our team stay after a little bit. If there are questions that you didn't write down or didn't think of, didn't want to ask in such a format, then please come up and visit with us. We'd be happy to answer those
I just
questions.
want to say, from an architectural standpoint, you're not going to find one in the country that's going to extend the imagination, that's going to extend the creativity, that's going to provide opportunities for kids to be alive. You're not. So we are blessed as a community that whatever we can think, we're gonna match it, and they're going to give us new ideas on top of it. So it's a great partnership, and we want to be part of that. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Have a great evening.